Your Excellency and Lady Rowland, Your Grace, Archbishop Clancy, Your Grace, Archbishop Robinson, fellow Australians. Welcome to the first ceremony of the 200th Australia Day celebrations. A special welcome to friends and fellow Australians who have gathered together at New South Wales House in London, where these brief proceedings are being broadcast live. The great events and celebrations which will take place in the hours ahead are dedicated to Australia. And it all began here, on this spot, 200 years ago. The founding of Sydney, the founding of New South Wales, the founding of Australia, where a few miserable huts and tents stood 200 years ago, now stands one of the greatest cities in the world, a living, growing, vibrant city, a city for the people.
Well, a very good morning to you all, and that is the scene and very characteristic of it as we watch and wait expectantly on South Head. People wending their way in their hundreds and, well, thousands, I may say, out to meet the First Fleet, who are in turn wending their way up the coast from Botany Bay, Kerry.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know exactly where the First Fleet is right at this point, but I'm sure that all the crew and trainees on board and the sponsors are very glad to be coming up to Sydney Harbour, because of course all the action's been up here with the tall ships at Darling Harbour. The fleet's been anchored at Botany Bay since the 18th. The boats haven't been watered, they haven't been able to get to shore, so perhaps they're feeling as glad to leave Botany Bay and arrive in Port Jackson as those on the First Fleet.
Well, it was reasonably quiet out in the harbour early this morning, but it was literally the calm before the storm, because now we are seeing so many spectator craft heading out towards them, and well, what a reception it's going to be when they arrive and they come through the heads, and well, they might be tired later on tonight, Kerry.
They're going to be very tired. They've been up probably now for about 24 hours. All the sponsors have got on board about 2 o'clock this morning, so they're going to be very tired. But it's so exciting for them as well, and very emotional. I'm sure they'll be wide awake for it all. Yeah, it's so pretty out here at the moment. It's beautiful weather. Glad we got all the rain out of the road on the weekend.
Do you think they could get a few more people on that boat?
What's that? That's the Alma de Pel. That's Victoria's sail training vessel. It was re-rigged a couple of years ago. It's quite an old ship. All the ships of the First Fleet, of course, will be just as crowded. What's
and
that
then
one?
It's the parade of 160, 50, 60, 80. It depends how many come out of the tall ships.
You know, it must be such an exciting time for all the people all the crews of the tall ships, because I suppose they've never seen anything quite like this before.
And they're all moored around the harbour at the moment, but they'll be led off in formation by the Young Endeavour later on this afternoon. And, well, they're still pouring outside the heads. But for the moment, from South Head, that's the scene, a very picnicky type atmosphere, the crowd building up. There's definitely a few thousand out here at the moment, and they're still wandering in on their bicycles. They've got their cut lunches and a bit of champagne, all very festive.
Also founded in 1788 is Parramatta, 20 kilometres to Sydney's west.
Well, while most of Sydney is heading for the harbour today, several thousand people have come out west to Parramatta to see a different kind of sailing that actually predates the First Fleet. Now, today we're going to see a bit of ballooning history, because 21 hot air balloons are about to be launched from Parramatta Park, making the largest mass takeoff ever over a metropolitan area. It takes less than half an hour to unpack, inflate and launch each balloon. The first step is to fill it with cold air. Then the fan's turned off and the pilot shoots in long flames of propane to heat it up. When it's hot enough, the envelope swings up into position over the basket, ready for takeoff. And there they go. Today's Armada, the biggest fleet of balloons ever to fly over an Australian city, is carrying 38 paying passengers, as well as professional balloonists and VIPs. There's also a cargo of historical First Day covers to commemorate Australia Day. A mobile post office has been set up in Parramatta Park for philatelic enthusiasts. The largest of the balloon attractions this morning is this thermal airship in the shape of the Australian flag. It's 22 metres long and takes 77,000 cubic feet of air to inflate.
Well, if all goes to plan today, we'll make history. First of all, it's the first official event for the bicentennial, and something like 2 million cubic feet of hot air will launch the birthday. So you'll see them all take off here, and as they take off, they'll rise like beautiful little bubbles, and then they'll just go in different directions, and they'll be looking for, from the time you go up, you're looking for a place to land. So it could be a field or a football playing ground, a schoolyard, wherever there'll be an empty space about an hour after they take off.
In the nation's capital, the Australian flag is to be raised in a traditional and colourful ceremony.
Is the setting for this morning's flag-raising ceremony. Here we are at Regatta Point, overlooking Lake Burley-Griffin, on what promises to be a magnificent Canberra day. We're here within the parliamentary triangle between Kings Avenue and Commonwealth Avenue bridges. The parade is led this morning by the band of the Royal Military College, Duntroon, the flag party from HMAS Harmon, and the Guard of Honour formed by cadets, also from the Royal Military College, Duntroon. The ceremonial dressing of the Guard is taking place, and all is set now for the arrival of His Excellency Sir Ninian Stephen, the Governor-General of Australia, and his group, including two well-known Canberrans, the Honourable Fred Daly, a former government minister, and Mrs Marjorie Turbain, well known to those in the media in Canberra as the manager of the National Press Club.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the raising of the Australian flag on Australia Day is a long-established tradition, an Australian tradition, and raising it here in our national capital is symbolic of the unity of this nation of ours. This year, it's got special significance. Significance because we review our past 2 centuries, and reflect on what the future holds for all of us. And on this immense flagpole, one Canadian tree from a Canadian forest, but on this occasion a tree put to good use, I ask that now be raised the Australian flag.
One of the hardest reenactments has been the first voyage of the Tom Thumb.
They're just coming on the last stretches of the river now. The weather is absolutely perfect, in a very marked contrast to the kind of conditions they've had to put up with for the past 4 days. There's people lined along the riverbanks just egging them on that final distance, and the whole event really seems to have captured the imagination of Bankstown. There's hundreds of people here and they're in for a really big welcome. The boat, built by students of Sydney Technical College, is an exact replica of the original vessel, the Tom Thumb. It was an epic voyage, taking on the open seas outside Sydney Harbour to Botany Bay to explore the uncharted waters of the Georges River in search of new land for settlement.
Further, boy, further. Okay. Further, my boy, further.
Hi, Adam.
A little bit.
Yes, congratulations on your achievement.
Thank you very much.
Your strength of mind and body, your worthy successes to those whose voyage you were reenacting.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you. Good morning.
Well, guys, how did it go?
Well, it's fairly rough on the first day. We got swamped.
You got swamped?
We sank, yes.
You sank?
We sank, yes.
And what happened?
Well, what happened? We were going out just after the head, so we had to row for about 2.5, 3 hours maybe. Then the wind came up quite strongly from the northeast, and we were running down to sea. And then she just dived into one trough, and we didn't come up, basically. Yeah.
So you would have had 2 days of almost constant rain.
Yeah. We've soaked on both days, actually. But it's quite cold actually in the wind, and you get a squall, and then the rain would pour, and then you get another squall, and the rain would pour. So we're getting quite cold.
Well, how was the rest of the trip after that?
Oh, in the river, it was really quite pleasant, actually.
And would you both do it again, all three of you?
Next year. Not today.
Well, one final question. Even with all sincerity, you did have radios and life jackets and backup support. What do you think of Bass and Flinders now, who did the whole thing on their own without any help of support if something went wrong?
Very intrepid, very adventurous, and very brave. Yes, very brave indeed.
I think Bass and Flinders may have chosen weather more better suited to the occasion. I think if it would have been raining on the day that they left, Bass and Flinders might have thought, well, we'll do it tomorrow.
And they didn't have to worry about
they had a schedule to keep, and they've kept to it very well.
So you maybe even had a rougher trip than Bass and Flinders did?
Yes, we had water skiers to contend with too, you know.
Happy birthday, Sydney. 200 years and the first fleet has arrived. To great applause around South Head and a massive spectator fleet, as you can see. And that's looking further
We
back
see
in
some
the fleet.
people manning the yard up there. You can see them right up there. What a sight they've got. You can hear the chopper flying overhead.
Well, every picture tells a story, and that one certainly does on Sydney Harbour.
That's the flagship, Soren Larsen, and 2 of the crew standing right up on the upper yard. On board we've got the fleet surgeon, the fleet purser, the commodore. On board also the Soren Larsen, the youngest full voyager, Natasha Davies, 4 years old in December. She celebrated her 4th birthday in the Great Australian Bight. She's the daughter of the captain, Tony Davies. She's travelling with her elder brother, Tristan Davies, who's now 7. So it's quite a family boat, the Soren Larsen. Can you believe it, what a sight that is?
Well, if Sydney Harbour is the 200th birthday cake, I can tell you there's an awful lot of candles on it, Kerry, at the moment.
Yeah, there's more boat than water out there. Very nervous captains, I can imagine, biting their nails, thinking how on earth they're going to get through all the spectator craft. this is it. This is what they've been working so hard for, to actually reach Sydney Harbour. They've come a long, long way. They've weathered a lot of storms. They've lost the first mate of Anna Christina overboard. So I imagine on Anna Christina right now a very emotional crew.
The Phillips Choice fleet up ahead. Love and War there leading them, leading the point of the cone. Sagacious is in second place, the Admiral's Cuppa. Then we've got Beyond Thunderdome and Drake's Prayer, Wild Oats and Pacific Phoenix. They're all there. Paladin, Salacia too. Some fantastic names in yachting around Sydney Harbour. Another Concubine, Nadia 4, and bringing up the rear Starlight Express, and very much what they're heading to, the Opera House. And what a crowd building up at the Opera House. Look at them.
All the people watching from the shore. We have the Kiwi boat, Tucker Thompson. Sailed all the way from New Zealand to London and back again. Some more people manning the yard. That's a precarious feeling being up there.
And you'd feel fairly privileged to be up there watching the yard, which is the Opera House surrounds, and thousands upon thousands of people gathered there, and they won't have too long to wait. The fleet
a lot of people
passing middle head at the moment.
A lot of people on the fleet have deliberately stayed in Botany Bay before because they didn't want to spoil their first sight of Sydney. So they stayed on board, didn't tempted to come up to Sydney, but left it till today to get their first sight of Sydney from on board the boat.
That's not a bad first sight.
There's an aerial of Bounty, all its square sails up. I had a steer of Bounty actually in Fremantle. It's quite good fun. So they've got a very big wheel on Bounty.
Well,
she looks a great boat, but she's a slow boat, you know. She is the slowest in the fleet. Where's Bounty? Where's Bounty? She was always about 200 miles behind.
But still quicker than the 3 knots they averaged for the first fleet 200 years ago.
Is that right, 3 knots?
3 knots.
Bounty was about 3 knots a lot of the time. She did put her engines on.
The foreshores looking out across the harbour.
That's Eye of the Wind. Very luxurious boat below decks. A lot different from the ship that I sailed on, one and all, the Australian sail training ship, which was very cramped below.
And if you can
That's a
stretch
beautiful
the
boat.
imagination a bit back 200 years ago, you'd see the Borrowdale perhaps and the Golden Grove sailing in alone.
Alone.
Well, not altogether alone, they had 9 companions in the form of the Sirius, the Lady Penrhyn, the Fishburne, the Charlotte, the Scarborough, the Prince of Wales, the Alexander, the Supply, and the Friendship.
But even today, the most overwhelming feeling is that this is history. This is history right now in the harbour. I don't think there's ever been a voyage, except for the First Fleet, of course, but there hasn't been a voyage like this since then.
Well, when do you think that hit home with the people on board? Was it straight away, do you feel, or perhaps halfway round, or on one of the longer legs, say from
Of how important a voyage it was?
yeah.
I think people were very committed to it right from the beginning. Of course, in Australia, we didn't hear much about them for a long time. Look at that shot.
Look out, Sydney!
How on earth are they going to get through all that?
Well, of course, as the boats move further up the harbour towards the Opera House and the harbour bridge, the supporting fleet of Sydney craft of all shapes and sizes are congesting up. And
We've
it's going to
seen
be
one
the big
casualty.
squeeze.
We've seen one casualty already.
That's
one
right.
police boat towing a motorcraft away. Mainstay. That's the sponsor of Svanen, our Svanen, the Canadian ship. All heading in the same direction, luckily.
Forced to enter a line in. The order was a little different to the one planned, with the exception of Soren Larsen, the flagship, which was in fact leading the way. And where is the way, you might ask?
It's fantastic. Bounty once again. Australia Post has been Bounty's sponsor, as you can see from the Australia Post flag.
Late again?
No, right on time today, right on time.
Today.
But as I was saying before, a very emotional time for a lot of the full voyages. There's Amorina. Alan Bond is on board Amorina today. A little different from the state of the craft he's used to. State-of-the-art craft, I'm sorry.
Swedish barkentine, Amorina. 55 berths on board, 19 cabins, and they are in relative luxury there compared to the rest of the fleet.
They have a big bar as well. Quite notorious.
If you're trying to get some sort of concept of size, the Amorina 48.5 metres long, but not quite as long as
not quite as long as that one.
The Fair Star or the
Which one
Sea
is it?
Princess, is it? That's a way to end a cruise. The Sea Princess has been in the South Pacific for 11 days, and not a bad way to tidy up a nice holiday.
It looks very ordered in a way, doesn't it? I mean, there are lots of boats out there, but I think it's likely that they're quite calm conditions.
From the
southeast pylon of the bridge, we see up the harbour.
Looking pretty lonely down there at the moment on the water. They've got a shock in store.
They're beautiful ships, aren't they?
Admiralty House and the Prime Minister. And he's going to go across to the Opera House. He was there yesterday for the handing over of the Young Endeavour. A kiss goodbye. And on the way for yet another big day in the Prime Ministerial year of 1988.
They'd better get over quick.
Well, the fleet made good time from just outside the heads to inside the heads. As it turned out, it looked as though they were going to take about an hour and a half, but they fired up the big Volvo engines in some cases and motored in. And another boat goes out to join the masses.
Well, we've seen the Prime Minister leaving Admiralty House, and he and Mrs. Hawke will be heading for the Man of War steps at Farm Cove, where they'll be met by the Governor General and Lady Stephen.
Hoping that they actually get there before all of this arrives too.
Very shortly, the Bicentennial Australia Day celebrations at the Opera House will be underway, and we cross there now to Peter Ross and Anne Dunn.
Good morning. Good morning again.
And good morning to you. Thank you, Richard.
It's a wonderful spectacle here. I'm sure we'll have to be rather sparse in the use of that adjective, but the first impression, of course, which is the strongest one, is of colour and of extraordinary brightness and lightness in the air, and some of those wide shots which you'll see later on out at the heads of Port Jackson will show you the size of the flotilla of aircraft, of sea vessels, and of course there are, yes, well, there we have that giant flag, and Port Jackson is very much alive this morning.
There are a large number of invited guests seated in the forecourt of the Opera House here. You can see that they come from a very wide variety of organisations. They come from ethnic communities, service clubs, youth groups, old age pensioners organisations, major companies, government departments. There are major public figures here, of course from church and religious groups as well. There are representatives of every local council in New South Wales here, and of course all the professions, the representatives of professional associations.
And you had diplomatic corps representation and
representatives of foreign governments, also of political parties.
This is called a celebration of Australia Day, a celebration of a nation. Quite a number of titles for it. It really is the big set piece for the 26th of January 1988. Now, the Prime Minister is on board this boat that's come from Admiralty House, and he'll be shortly arriving. So we have some clouds, you see, but it doesn't look at all threatening, even though it's a little grey.
Now we see the Heritage Guard coming into position for the arrival of the royal party.
Yes, and what a sight that is too. That's wonderful.
Now, the Heritage Guard is made up of 108 soldiers and sailors in historic costume. You can see the historic costume there of the 30 Royal Australian Navy sailors wearing the naval uniforms worn at the time of the First Fleet.
Except they didn't have shoes in those days. That's true, they didn't. No.
Now the Australian Defence Force Guard, of course, members of all three services, the naval contingent from HMAS Narimba.
Sometimes known as the Tri-Service, we don't much like the expression.
The Army contingent from the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, an airborne infantry role, and the Air Force component, ground crews from various units around Sydney.
This, of course, is a great ceremonial occasion. It's a heaven-sent opportunity for regimental showing off, if you like, and the crowd, we all respond to it so quickly.
And the Royal Australian Navy Band.
And now coming from Admiralty House, I believe it is the Prime Minister. Yes, I think it's the Prime Minister. And he's made this trip several times, of course. He made it yesterday under the same conditions, making the same quick visit. It's only just across the harbour to Admiralty House. Described as the choicest piece of real estate in Sydney. And
now the royal party departs from Woolloomooloo.
Yes.
So you can see how it's tightly coordinated from crucial points all around Sydney Harbour, departures and arrivals. While we here are waiting in readiness for their arrival, they're leaving exactly to time, just around the corner.
Yes.
Prince Charles and Lady Diana seated with Sir Ninian and Lady Stephen, of course, Sir Ninian waving to the crowd along the wharves.
Oh.
Now here we are at the Man o' War steps, where you can see the Prime Minister, Mr. Hawke, awaiting the arrival of the royal party. Oh, you can see clearly now how the heritage contingent is lining the Man o' War steps. And of course there's this marvellous crowd all along the shores of Farm Cove here.
And with the background, that's the Royal Botanic Gardens behind.
And the site, of course, of the colony's first farm, indeed.
Yes,
hence its name.
A farm that failed in the first season, and the fledgling colony nearly perished of starvation. It was a very fragile beginning to
indeed it was. They planted some 9 acres with corn.
And it was the wrong time of the year.
They got their seasons back to front.
Now the crowd, I'm not very good at estimating crowds. What do you like, Anne?
Well, I was told that altogether there would be something like 8,000 people, both inside and outside the Opera House today. So there are about 4,000 people here now.
This forecourt, of course, is a wonderful venue because it's so open, of course, with the wonderful background of the shelves of the Opera House and the harbour on either side. It really lends itself for great ceremonial occasions like this.
And a very clever sort of tent-like shape has been erected to protect the musicians, echoing the shapes of the shells of the Opera House. You see it come into shot there, the pole, the flag poles, and below it, the tent-like coverage to protect the singers and musicians, the Second Royal Military Band and Sydney Symphony Orchestra.
There's the canopy that's been set up, rather like the sails of the Opera House.
Philharmonia Choir.
And they needed that because at rehearsals 2 or 3 days ago it bucketed down, and even with that canvas awning they were still drenched. So it's more to protect them against the sun, I think, than the other elements. But it's a very tastefully and beautifully designed canopy.
The Naval Band is standing by to welcome the royal party.
Now you see, there's the coat hanger on your left.
We couldn't have a better day for it.
No, it's wonderful. It is wonderful. It's no doubt a stunning city, and very much an emerald city today too. The sea is very, very green, very much alive. And here come the royals round the corner. Here they come past what I think is known as the revetment, which is that wall that's been built there. And the police escort are heading into man-of-war steps. The most popular visitors we can have to the shore, I think, universally popular, the Prince and the Princess of Wales. And they thoroughly enjoyed themselves here yesterday. It was quite obvious that they were relaxed and joined in the spirit of the whole endeavour, young endeavour ceremony yesterday, and I'm sure that will be the same again today.
Yes, it's something that would have appealed to them particularly, I think, that handing over the sail training ship. Prince Charles has always had a strong interest in young people, as has his father, after whom, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme is named.
Now they're very, very close now.
Now here's in the foreground you
see the Australian shot that is too, isn't it?
In the foreground you see the Australian Defence Force Guard from the 3 services. And coming into shot now in the foreground also the Royal Heritage Guard.
Yes. Yes, certainly worth waiting for, because we have a wonderful, have a great opportunity to see.
And here you see Princess Diana waving to the crowd, who are greeting her enthusiastically. Hear their cheers, perhaps.
And she wore
Prince
a hat
Charles
like
waving.
that yesterday, actually, wide-brimmed hat.
Very sensible in this climate.
So our royal visitors have arrived, or practically arrived, safe and sound at the steps. Yes.
The Royal Highness, the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Now hear the crowd roar as they step onto the shore, following Stephen Hall's announcement of their presence.
There are the inevitable greetings to be carried on, and Prime Ministers to be met and re-met over and over again. Talking to Mr. Gleeson there, who is the chairman of the New South Wales Bicentennial Council.
Yes, he is, Jerry Gleeson, yes.
And that again is one of those interesting shots with so much information in the foreground. The colour of those uniforms, the mix of uniforms. Now the royal
in the
party.
foreground there, yes, a member of the Heritage Guard in the uniform of the Marines of the 18th century, late 18th century Marines, the tricorn hat, red jacket and white facing.
And now they're preparing to get the signal to move. And here comes the Premier of New South Wales.
Sir Ninian Stephen.
Followed by Sir Ninian
And
Stephen.
Prince Charles, of course. Sir Ninian, as you were explaining yesterday, under these circumstances actually takes precedence over Prince Charles because he is the representative of the Queen.
Yes, it's one of those little nuances of protocol
Yes.
you have to be careful about, I suppose.
I'm fascinated.
I'm sure it doesn't miff Prince of Wales.
Amongst the members of the Heritage Guard, we saw the New South Wales Corps.
Yes.
came to be known infamously as the Rum Corps, of course.
Indeed. There's a wonderful shot of the royal couple. I must say our cameras have been able to get
The crowd is rising to its
nice and
feet as
close.
they cross
Yes.
the forecourt.
Yes, and the crowd is rising to their feet.
See the flags waving in the foreground. They're spontaneously standing and applauding as they cross in front of the Royal Defence Force Guard. Come onto the dais.
They're moving forward a little bit. They're a little cramped there for a while.
Now they'll be taking up a position in front of 3 flagpoles here, and in the course of the royal salute, 3 standards will be broken, that is, unfurled, waved free in the breeze. They're the personal flags of the state governor, Sir James Rowland, the Governor-General, Sir Ninian Stephen, and the personal standard of Prince Charles.
Now we'll stand by for the royal salute.
There go the flags. After this, something like 100 flags will be unfurled around Farm Cove, the periphery of Farm Cove.
And there's the crowd that has been waiting here patiently for many hours for this ceremony. And there, as the cameras pull back to reveal what is really one of the great and wonderful buildings of this world. There, the Royal Highnesses are moving forward with Sir James Rowland.
Accompanied by Sir James Rowland, yes. Following the salute, Joan Carden will sing our national anthem, our national tune, strictly speaking.
Yes.
Advance Australia Fair.
And then there'll be a series of speeches after that. Now the guard is marching off, and the Royal Highnesses are preparing themselves and putting order of service, as it were.
Princess Diana applauding the Royal Australian Naval Band as they march away, and the Defence Force Guard, the Royal Guard. There must be some glare off the forecourt, I think, as Princess Diana has put on her sunglasses.
It used to be that members of the royal family didn't wear sunglasses.
What a stickler for tradition you are, Peter.
No, I'm not. They were. Anyway, they're very
next to
smart
Princess
sons.
Diana is the State Premier, Mr. Unsworth, in conversation with her now.
Yes.
They have on their knees a beautifully prepared and presented programme of the day's events, of which we also were given a copy, and it gives a brief history of the settlement
Ladies
of
and
Port
gentlemen,
Jackson, and then an
the
order
national
of today's
anthem.
events. The national anthem. beautiful voice of Joan Carden, a Melbourne-born soprano who calls Sydney home now. Star of this month's Opera in the Park in the Domain when she played Violetta.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join Joan Carden, the Sydney Symphony Orchestra and the Philharmonia Choir as they sing the bicentennial hymn, Lord of Earth and All Creation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable R.J.L. Hawke.
Your Excellencies, Your Royal Highnesses, Premiers of the States of the Commonwealth, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We begin these celebrations today in no spirit of boastfulness or of national self-glorification. This is a day of commemoration. Even more important, it is a day of commitment. Commemoration of the past, commitment to the future. But my fellow Australians, today I use the word commitment in a very special sense. For our commitment to Australia is, in a very real way, the quality which best defines what it means to be an Australian in 1988. For let us ask ourselves on this day of all days, what is it that links us in this generation with the generations that have gone before? It is not only the fact that for the past 200 years and to this day we have been a nation of immigrants. It is not only the fact that we share together this vast continent as our homeland. It is not only the shared inheritance of all that has been built here and achieved here over the past 200 years. And it is not only the common bond of institutions, standards, language and culture. Indeed, in today's Australia, our very diversity is an ever-growing source of a richness, vitality and the strength of our community. In Australia, there is no hierarchy of descent. There must be no privilege of origin. The commitment is all. The commitment to Australia is the one thing needful to be a true Australian. And today, my fellow Australians, at this historic place and at this historic hour, let us all renew that commitment. Our commitment to Australia and to Australia's cause, the cause of freedom, fairness, justice and peace.
Ladies and gentlemen, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my wife and I are delighted to be able to return to Australia at this very special time to celebrate with you your nation's bicentennial. It is a historic and splendid occasion for all of us, not only here in Australia, but all over the world, and not least in the United Kingdom. The modern nation of Australia began here 200 years ago today. They were harsh beginnings, and the people who were sent here against their will had little cause to rejoice. And all that was just yesterday. As history goes, 200 years is barely a heartbeat. Yet look around you and see what has happened in that time. A whole new free people. The people of a whole new free country, Australia. If it takes regular visitors from an old country to help you decide whether you should be celebrating or not, my wife and I will be glad to be of assistance. We are both very happy to have been invited to the party. When Captain Cook discovered this part of the great Southland and claimed it for the British Crown, he was sailing in quest of knowledge. And whatever is said about the founding of the British Empire, the astonishing courage and resolve of many people like Captain Cook, who dramatically advanced the sum of human knowledge in their quest for discovery and trade, should not be ignored amidst the less worthy aspects of the story. But as still happens today, when knowledge is invariably examined for its less exalted applications, King George III's ministers fairly soon saw the practical possibilities of a place where inconvenient people could be transported and forgotten. There is no point now in trying to gloss over the circumstances in which the country of which you are rightly proud began. Indeed, to face those facts is a necessary part of realizing just how proud you should be. For the sad truth is that in those early days of the colony, nobody was free. The men who guarded the convicts were in prison along with them. They were all a long way from home, and they all, no doubt, thought that Australia was the worst place in the world. But the best part about the story is that they made their prison into a new home, where freedom became not just the dream of those in shackles, but a reality for everybody. It didn't happen by accident. It took the intelligence and courage of brave men and women. Even within the astonishingly brief span which covers the whole history of modern Australia, the process of making liberty an institution took time. For the original people of this land, it must all have seemed very different. And if they should say that their predicament has not yet ended, it would be hard to know how to answer, beyond suggesting that a country free enough to examine its own conscience is a land worth living in, a nation to be envied. Anyway, most people who live here now seem to think Australia is the best place in the world, and the rest of the world finds it difficult to argue. By now, almost every country on Earth is the old country to some family in Australia. Coming from your first old country and celebrating the 22nd anniversary to the month of my first transportation to Australia, many of you may not realize that part of my own education took place here in Australia. Quite frankly, it was by far the best part, and something which I shall always cherish. It gave me an insight into the character of this country and the individuals who have shaped it by the force of their personalities and by their infectious good humor. While I was here, I had the pommy bits bashed off me, like chips off an old block, and the results are only too obvious. I keep coming back for more, and it is always a special pleasure. But my wife and I are particularly glad to be here this year, on this great day, to help you, as if the Aussies needed help in anything, to celebrate your good fortune and to wish you well for a future that holds out such great promise.
His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. Here comes the first wave of Navy aircraft, Squirrel helicopters and Sea King helicopters, in which, of course, Prince Charles' brother, Prince Andrew, flew off the aircraft carrier Invincible during the Falklands War.
Yes, they were very much the star performers in that conflict.
Well, they play an extremely dangerous role because they literally seduce incoming missiles away from the ship by tilting their rotor blades to interfere with the radar.
How do you know such things as that?
I have my spies.
I'm very impressed now. You'll become our defense correspondent immediately. Well, here the helicopters are hovering towards us, and
there are in that first wave of naval aircraft, there are 5 Squirrel helicopters, 4 Sea King helicopters, 4 Wessex helicopters, and somewhere 2 turboprop planes used for electronic warfare
They're
training.
taking up the rear somewhere. Quite apart from the 13 other civilian helicopters, of course, have been hopping around getting a marvellous view of this and providing tape for news bulletins and all the channels in Sydney. And the music is coming to something of a climax too. It seems to be all highly appropriate. I wonder if they rehearsed this.
The medley ends with Waltzing Matilda.
Good, my favourite tune. Well, they're taking a little while to get to us because it's sort of slightly foreshortened shot and you think they're closer than they really are. But
they're travelling from east to west over the Opera House steps and through to the Bradfield Highway, to the bridge.
They're not flying under the bridge, I hope.
Not as far as I know, no.
Here they come now. That's a great sight, isn't it? Coming directly over the torch. Yes. There's a change of mood with the music. I'm sure they've rehearsed all this. This is the first wave of the Air Force display. Well, not Air Force, of course, it comes from other services as well, the Navy included.
Listen to the sound of them as they go over. Going right over our heads now. Gorgeous.
And now following the
first
helicopters,
aircraft
we
of
have the turboprops, I think. These are the slower aircraft.
The second wave of aircraft are Army aircraft, Kiowa light observation helicopters, Porter light aircraft and Nomads.
Yes, these are used for reconnaissance and surveillance. We can hear the drone of them as they approach. These are
the
slow
orchestra
aircraft.
launches into Rule Britannia.
I don't know that's entirely appropriate for these aircraft.
Well, they're joined at this point by the Philharmonia choirs. Now, these are the light aircraft, obviously, the Nomads and the Porters of the Army.
We'll have to speak up a bit, I think, Anne, in a moment. In fact, the whole commentary position seems to be shaking here at the moment.
That's just a fantastic sight.
Yes. This is quite a magical moment, I must say.
As they fly across
good contrasting sky.
The past and the present.
The stirring patriotic song in the background from the Philharmonia Choir and the Sydney Symphony Orchestra.
There's something like 200 singers there today, combining the Sydney Philharmonia Choir and the Motet Choir.
Now the skies will almost be as crowded as the water.
The final wave of the fly past are 120 RAAF planes. They'll fly past in 4 waves, starting with the slowest aircraft and ending with the fastest, which means it'll get louder and louder as they go by, of course.
Indeed so. They will be ending with Mirage jets and so on. And there, of course, gives you a wonderful opportunity for those people who don't know Sydney well to see something of the geography, something of the bays and the coves of what is regarded as one of the great harbours of the world. And it looks really splendid today. It's dressed overall. And there's a great shot from our ABC helicopter, I think, which gives you a wonderful perspective.
Flying above the planes.
We should put our hands together for that shot alone, I think. Very steadily and beautifully held as they make their progress over the fair star.
They're flying relatively low, these aircraft. They're flying at altitudes between 700 and 1,500 feet, or 200 and 450 meters only.
Yes. Well, people. I think 500 is the absolute minimum, as I seem to remember, but...
500 feet?
Yes, I may be wrong about that.
Oh,
here we go. This is the noise. I guess half speed there, because it's only half the noise I anticipated.
There they go.
Well, I must tell you, and the Mile Lakes a few weeks ago with my 2 young children, suddenly a mirage swooped across the lake, and we threw ourselves to the ground. It was a most amazing experience. The last thing you expect in a quiet little country place. And now they're walking away, and the crowd is appreciative of their royal visitors. What a splendid occasion it's been, and we both feel very happy to have been here in our superb spot.
It's been a very privileged position that we've been in, and it's been the most wonderful ceremony, the major ceremony of Australia Day, with so much more to follow.
And as the dancers jig and reel in Sydney's Centennial Park, the celebration of the nation continues around the country.
Hello and welcome back to Centennial Park. We're celebrating the fact that on this day, 100 years ago, this park was dedicated to the people of New South Wales. It was a sort of centenary birthday present. At that time, there were 40,000 people that turned out for the dedication of the park. Today, not quite that many. I think they're all down around the harbour foreshores. But still, hundreds of people here today about to witness an authentic reenactment of that dedication ceremony.
Ladies and gentlemen, 100 years ago, in the presence of the Premier of New South Wales, Sir Henry Parkes, the governors and premiers of all the Australian states, the Governor of New South Wales, Lord Carrington, is with us again. And I now call him forward.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, I have now great pleasure in declaring that this great park is dedicated to the enjoyment of the people of New South Wales forever.
With the Australian Jazz Orchestra almost blowing the sails from the Opera House, the Prince and Princess of Wales are on the harbour for the afternoon spectacle. Clouds of balloons fly towards the bridge as Britain's bicentennial gift to Australia, the Young Endeavour, leads the parade of tall ships down the harbour. And Gordon Bray is in the thick of things on HMAS Canberra.
Thanks very much, Barry, and yes, we're on HMAS Canberra, which is a guided missile frigate, and with me is the Director of Tall Ships in the Northern Hemisphere, our expert commentator today, John Hamilton. Well, John, you've seen scenes like this around the world, but how does it rate?
Oh, it's got to be the most exciting one I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen so many craft on the water, and I'm happy to say, behaving very well indeed too. That's very important because as the excitement builds, when the parade of sail starts, I hope they go on behaving like that, but it's got to be an exciting scene.
It's not really going to be a parade of sail, though, is it, because of this breeze? It looks to be southeast at the moment, about 11 knots, so they're going to have to reduce as much sail, particularly with the square rig sails.
Yes, that's right. Sadly, they won't be able to set very much square canvas unless the wind changes direction. I hope that they'll set their fore and aft sails, and that will be something to look at. But we can't have it always. When the first fleet came in this morning, they had a commanding wind, they looked grand. So we've been spoiled in the morning. Sadly, we won't be spoiled in the afternoon as well, I'm afraid. We're looking now at the crew of the Guayas manning the yards in their coloured shirts there, and that's a pretty dramatic sight.
And the Guayas, a beautifully appointed craft. What's the accommodation like below?
Well, here on board Guayas, I can answer some of those questions about the accommodation below. We actually voyaged all the way up from Hobart. It took us a week, and I must tell you the accommodation is a little cramped, to say the least. 11 of us were in one very small, rather cramped bunk. But rather, I should say, rather cramped cabin with 11 bunks. But with me is someone who can tell you more about that, Midshipman Paul Cantor from the Royal Australian Navy. Now, Paul, you've been on board for a month on an exchange. What is life like on board? Is it tough? Is it hard work?
There is a lot of hard work. It is tough in some ways. A lot of rope handling.
But come on, now you told me you've got water twice a day for 20 minutes only for 43 or 63 of you to have a shower.
Yeah, well, that is the tough bits. If you miss out, you have to live with it. Just try and get the shower the next one round.
And you hope your friends don't mind too much?
Certainly not.
Paul, you've obviously had a fantastic time on board this ship. I've known these people for a week. They're wonderful people. How much has it meant to you being on board here?
It's meant the world to me, and today to see everyone turning out, it's absolutely fantastic.
Yes, well, following Guayas is Gorge Fock, the West German boat, a three-masted bark, and quite similar to the Guayas. And
can I tell you a little story about the Gorge Fock? Well, it's a story about any of the training ships. This is their way of saying thank you to the people of Sydney and to all the Australian ports by means of television, to say thank you for the immense amount of hospitality that they've received while they've been in Sydney and in the other ports. And it's also important to realise that this is a ceremonial occasion, a saying of thanks. But I remember seeing the Gorge Fock taking part in a parade of sail like this in her own country in Bremerhaven, and I said when I went on board half an hour later, to a cocktail party. I said to the steward serving the drinks, what were you doing half an hour ago? And he said, half an hour ago I was furling the royals. And so they have to be able to be up in the rigging there, working the sails, back down on deck, helping to run a cocktail party, then keeping watch, steering, so many different jobs. And they're pretty versatile, these guys.
Their Royal Highnesses are aboard HMAS Cook, which is a survey and oceanographic vessel. Does a lot of civilian research as well for the CSIRO, the universities and the museum. And I wonder if that hat is part of Prince Charles's personal wardrobe or it's a gift from a friendly Aussie. But I'm sure Australians seeing him wearing that famous slouch hat will be very warmed by the gesture.
Now we're looking at Asgard. Asgard was shipped over here. Sadly, she couldn't sail out under her own keel because, of course, she has an important training role to do in her own country. And so when she finished her summer season in Ireland, she was put on board a container ship, brought over to Sydney, put back in the water, and the mate and bosun rigged her in 3 days, and she was able to sail down to Hobart and proudly, and back to Melbourne, I beg your pardon, to Melbourne and then to Hobart, and proudly took her place in the race. And you can see quite a large national ensign flying there from Asgard.
And there are 12 young Australians on board Asgard 2, which is skippered by Tom McCarthy. And look at the clearance.
Nipple Maru.
Well, she's a four-masted bark.
Yes, she's got square sails on the front 3 masts and 4 1/2 rigged on what's called the jigger mast. So although she's a very, very large ship, she isn't technically allowed to call herself a ship. She's a 4-masted bark. And she's quite new as well, about 5 years old, and very much state-of-the-art square rigger, if you like. She's actually got a performance meter on board, so they can tell if they're sailing as efficiently as possible, rather like an IOR yacht.
A crew of 155, including 90 trainees. Her home port is Tokyo, and she's regarded really as the biggest and most technologically advanced, as John mentioned, sailing ships in the world. And in her pre-construction, wind tunnel testing and computer-generated projections took place to come up with this superb vessel. She's 110 metres in length, so she's just 3 metres short of being the longest vessel, but her mast's 50 metres high and just clearing the harbour bridge.
Hi, James Valentine here on board the US Coast Guard bark, the Eagle. And we're getting a sort of deckhand's eye view of the whole activity here. We just started on the huge wheels that spin the ship around. 6 of the crew will haul on those wheels and spin it around, and up there into the rigging, where several hours ago the men and the crew of the US Coast Guard Eagle were up in there preparing the sails to be unfurled. Hopefully they'll unfurl them all the way for us a little bit later on.
And maybe that's the Labumba that Stuart Scowcroft was talking about.
Ah, that's a different way of manning the rigging, but they're certainly not manning their guns. Can from the yards there. I think that's the Lewin, isn't it?
All the way from Western Australia. She's WA's official sail training vessel.
That's a beautiful shot there of the Nipple Maru. You can see the 4 1/2 sail. When seen from the beam there, looks pretty impressive. And here we've got Darmojeji, the beautiful Polish ship. Her maiden voyage was the Karisak Tall Ships race in 1982. She actually took part in a race as her maiden voyage. She's a most magnificent ship. If you have an eye for these square riggers, she has a modern sort of appearance to her. And you'll notice that her yards are equally spaced out, whereas the older ships, some of the yards are in pairs. The lower topsail and upper topsail yards, when the sails are furled, are close together, whereas in the Darmojeji, even when the sails are furled, the yards are equally spaced. And in the back behind Darmojeji there, you can see the 4 spars of the big Spanish ship Juan Sebastian de Elcano.
And what a shot. high above the Sydney Harbour Bridge, traffic flowing past unawares of the majestic vessel passing underneath them.
And incidentally, there's not so much room. It's quite a tight fit to get her under the bridge.
From the Polish Merchant Navy, a crew of 134, a fully rigged vessel. And with her masts 50 metres high, they say she's about 16 stories high of a normal tall building.
Of course, that ship has sailed out here. She's far too big to come out any other way. And she started her voyage in August this year. I was privileged to be on board her in Southampton in England to wave goodbye to her. And here I am, doubly privileged to be out here in the harbour seeing her sail under the Sydney Bridge. There they are manning the yards. Difficult to say which ship that is. It's not Darmagegi because you've got the double yards together. We'll see in a minute. Oh, it's the Shabab Oman. Very easy to spot with the Sultan of Oman's insignia there on her gaff topsails. That gives me quite a thrill of excitement because I was the chief officer of that ship when she was first built. The Juan Sebastian de Elcano gives purists a splendid set of arguments. Exactly what rig is she? Because she's one of a pair of sisters, the Juan Sebastian de Elcano from Spain and the Esmeralda from Chile. And in fact, de Elcano is a topgallant schooner. So the captain tells us, and he's got to be right.
This vessel made her maiden voyage to Australia way back in 1927, and when she was in Sydney, several sailors jumped ship, and one Juan Lopez now lives in Albury, and I believe he's been down to revisit the old girl.
Hello, Mum. How would you like that to be your son climbing up the rigging there? It looks very dangerous. Happily, it isn't dangerous, providing you obey the rules. And this is the whole thing about sailing these huge sailing ships and the small ones. The young people are not in any danger, providing everybody sticks to the rules. He's going to climb up now. In a minute, he has to go over what's called the futtock shrouds. You see him leaning backward and outwards. That is a very scary point he's at now. But he seems to have done it many times before, and I guess he wasn't scared, but I bet he was the first time he did it. You have to lean right back out, hanging seemingly out at right angles to the sea. And the first time you do it, believe me, it's very scary.
So the three-masted Bark Eagle, square-rigged on all masts except the aftermast, formerly a German Navy vessel, seized by the Americans in 1946 as war reparations, 139 trainees on board, and a quarter of those females. So the Eagle, sporting the distinctive red and blue striped livery of the Coast Guard, and she has now become America's best known tall ship. She held place of honor during the tall ships gathering in conjunction with the Statue of Liberty centenary celebrations.
It's rather nice that over the years the captains and the organizers of these events have got to know each other very well. Ernie Cummings, the master of Eagle there, wanted a Monopoly set in English. He didn't want the American version, he wanted the English version with all the English place names and so on. So all he had to do was to get onto the STA, and we sent him one out there. But seriously, if the masters and the organizers of the event know each other as good friends, then that friendship spreads down through the various levels on board, down to the most junior cadets. And the cadets feel that they'll be welcome on each other's ships because they know that the captains are good friends. They therefore feel they can go on board each other's vessels and, as I often put it, swap lies about how rugged it's all been. And that's what we're trying to do, to get these youngsters together. Americans, Japanese, Russians, Polish, all the different nations.
So many wonderful little nooks and crannies around Sydney Harbour. It really is shimmering in all its glory. that it really has been a day to remember.
Now available from ABC Books, Waltzing Matilda, the true story of the Swagman and the Shearers strike, and how they came to be immortalised in one of Australia's most popular songs.
Several books have been written, and they all got it wrong. And furthermore, they even said that Banjo Patterson didn't write the words, and somebody else wrote the music. Right. I mean, it was written here in the bush, up here in the northwest of Queensland. And so I set about proving it and turning legend into history.
Waltzing Matilda, now available from ABC shops and bookstores everywhere.
They call it Australia all over.
G'day, this is Australia All Over. I'm Ian McNamara, and g'day Cloncurry and Sajuna and Cootamundra, and here's our favourite song.
Oh, I made 100 in the backyard at Mum's.
We can't seem to play tracks like that enough on Australia All Over, so we've collected them all on an album, and we've called it Australia All Over. and I reckon it's got some of the best Australian music around, like this one from John Williamson.
Yeah, all Australian boys need a shed. Yeah, all Australian boys need a shed.
And a song for Innisfail and Tully, where the annual rainfall's around 12 feet.
Rain coming down on the cane, on the roofs of the town.
And there's some verse too, read by John Derham.
They don't build houses like that anymore. Not with verandas the way they used to.
Get hold of Australia All Over from ABC shops and record stores everywhere.
Or you can order by dialling this number, 008 02 3333. It's a free call, all over Australia.
Well, I love it.
Australia All Over. You'd be mad if you miss out on it.
When England played their first ever cricket match in Australia in 1862, 6,000 fans were expected. 20,000 turned up. The story of cricket in Australia. Video and illustrated book tell the extraordinary growth of this popular sport from the 1800s to the World Series revolution.
So I said, yes, I'm in. Got a cab into Kerry's office and he said to me, righto, he said, you're captain of this lot. I said, well, you know, just hang on before you go anywhere. I said, Greg's captain of the present Australian side. The players might not want me as captain. He said, what do you think this is, a belief in democracy or something?
The story of cricket in Australia. Team it up with the complete book of Australian Test cricket records. The ultimate statistical reference for every cricket fan.
Are available at ABC shops and retailers everywhere.
Or order by phone, 008 02 3333. How's that?